Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Samara Berger, and I am with the Office of Enrollment Management. I am so excited to welcome you all to our Trailblazers session, China-Africa Relations, Past and Future, with Professor Adel Karai. Our hope today is that you will get a glimpse into our vibrant academic community, and you will see for yourself why this place has become home for so many. So we hope you leave this session today feeling really inspired by our talented faculty and excited by the possibility of joining this rich, diverse community of thinkers, scholars, change makers, go-getters. The blank is there for you to fill in. But before we go any further, I do just want to share a couple of housekeeping items. Please note that all attendees will be muted throughout the duration of the session. However, that doesn't mean that just because we can't see you, we can't feel your energy out there. So please stick with us through the duration of the session. While we won't cover any admissions or financial aid info today, you can reach out to us if you have any questions about the application process by visiting our website, give us a call, send us an email, an owl, whatever method works for you. Our staff is ready and available to help with any questions and concerns that you may have. But if you're interested in asking questions specifically about this session, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will have time for some live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. I would like to now introduce Professor Karai. Professor Maria Adel Karai is the Assistant Professor of Global China Studies at NYU Shanghai. Her research explores the history of international law in East Asia and investigates how China's rise as a global power is shaping norms and redefining the international distribution of power. Prior to joining NYU Shanghai, she was a recipient of a 3-year Marie Curie Fellowship at KU Leuven. She was also a fellow at the Italian Academy of Columbia University, Princeton Harvard China and the World Program, Max Weber Program in the European University Institute of Florence, and New York University Law School. In this webinar specifically, Professor Karai will discuss China-Africa relations past and future. Over the past 2 decades, China's influence in Africa has repeatedly and rapidly expanded. In 2009, China surpassed the United States as Africa's largest trading partner. Most countries in sub-Saharan Africa have signed on to the Chinese President Xi Jinping's signature $1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative, known as BRI. Yet, debates persist about the state of this relationship. Many in the West have charged China with developing into a neocolonial power that aims to colonize a weak and hapless Africa, but such allegations seem both false and overblown. The Trump administration repeatedly but baselessly described China's overseas development finance activities as debt trap diplomacy. This talk is going to go beyond such misleading narratives and politicized rhetoric to explore from a historical perspective the nature of Africa-China engagement. So Professor Karai, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, for the kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here. And I actually really look forward to the Q&A from students that are attending at this very brutal time in the morning. As it was already introduced, today I'm going to talk about China-Africa relations and how they've been framed, how poorly they've been framed, how it doesn't necessarily help us better understand this kind of important relationship. And I just want to go straight to the plan. So what I'm planning to do this morning in my presentation. So in my brief talk today, I'm going to talk about the trends in China-Africa relation from Bandung to the present. Bandung was this conference that took place in 1954 that really shaped part of this relationship. And then I will talk about different ways, 4 ways in particular, in which China-Africa relationship has been framed: SouthSouth Corporation or win-win cooperation, neocolonialism, debt trap, China model. And then I will talk about the future of the relationship and how defining properly China-Africa relations is essential to make a good diagnosis and find proper ways to deal with a rising China that is scary for many. In my presentation today, I'm focusing mostly on the PRC, People Republic of China, not all Chinese history, and the PRC history is already very broad. And just to give you a bit of a context before I discuss how the relationship has been framed. So the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. And in the 1950s and 1960s, the PRC was occupied in surviving pretty much, in establishing itself also internationally. And most importantly, in the international arena, it was very much concerned in getting recognition, getting recognized by other states. And as a matter of fact, the Chinese, once the Chinese Civil War ended, and the PRC was founded in 1949, the nationalists led the foundation of the Republic of China, that is today Taiwan, and the communists instead led the foundation of the People's Republic of China, and have engaged in a diplomatic warfare ever since, with each side trying to get allies to recognize themselves. And according to the People's Republic of China Constitution, one of the major endeavor of the Communist Party remains the reunification of the motherland that includes Taiwan. And here is why, like, even today, Taiwan is such a hot topic, and there can be a war between China and Taiwan, and between China and the US, precisely because of this very hot issue. And the Republic of China on its side claimed to be a government representative of the entire China until 1991. Then this claim kind of was lifted because it was no longer possible to sustain. But that is said because basically the newly independent states of Africa in the 1950s and 60s became a battlefield for recognition between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. And today, only Eswatini recognize the Republic of China. So the PRC China has been very successful. And Africa has continued to legitimize the People's Republic of China globally. Today, African states are still very important politically for China because of their support of China internationally in fora like the United Nations, where, for instance, they avoid criticisms of China human rights abuse or like the behavior in South China Sea. And so China also, just again to give you a bit of a context, in the first decades of its existence was very much active in the promotion of international proletarian revolution and communism, also in Africa. But then when it started opening up with Deng Xiaoping reform in 1980s, China started to liberalize its economy, and it started to focus more on economic aspect, less ideological aspects. And another aspect to keep in mind is that like trade between China and Africa increased 700% during the 1990s, which is quite remarkable. And the emergence of China as a global economic power has translated into its increased influence abroad. And in Africa, China's presence is very significant. In the past 2 decades, China's investment on the continent have skyrocketed. And since 2009, China has become the largest Africa trading partner. And after 2016, China traded with Africa has been larger than the US, Japan, UK, and France combined together. China also contractor have built more than 60% of the entire construction market in Africa in 2019, right before the pandemic. Another important thing to keep in mind is that this Forum on China-Africa Cooperation FOCA that was established in October 2000, that became the official forum to greatly strengthen the relationship. And so overall, China, with China Global Rise and at its balloon presence in Africa, increased concern about China-Africa relations. And African countries see China as a development partner, as an economic competitor, or as a colonizer. And in general, we can summarize the relationship, how the relationship has been described in 4 broad categories that I'm going to discuss today. So one is SouthSouth Corporation, neocolonialism, debt trap, and the China model. But let's start with the SouthSouth Corporation. So the SouthSouth Corporation, that actually this is a rhetoric that China mostly promotes, that brings like to this win-win cooperation. So the concept of global North and global South is usually used to describe a grouping of countries along socioeconomic and political characteristics. And the Global South is a term that is used to identify lower income countries on one side that are separate from the Global North, the US, Western countries that instead are much more developed economically and politically. And Chinese officials often claim that their country massive involvement in Africa is an example of South-South cooperation with tremendous potential for to unlock African development prospects. And they also maintain that China's economic involvement in the continent is less exploitative and more relevant to local needs than the one of the North. So that's how they tend to frame their relationship with Africa. And although the term Global South emerged in the 70s, one key moment for the development of this kind of South-South cooperation idea started as its roots in Bandung Conference that took place in 1955 in Indonesia. And according to the plan to participate in Bandung, China's basic principle at the conference were to expand the United Front for World Peace. And so here we also have like this very communist and Soviet kind of ideology, promote national independent movement, and create conditions for establishing and enhancing the China ties and diplomatic relations with various African and Asian countries. Bandung was also a place where the developing world, the Global South, became aware of itself as a force in international relations. And it's also where they started to debate the non-aligned movement, where this idea of non-alignment from with the Cold War kind of division of the world really took place. And in Bandung, there was also a code, certain codes and norms that were developed that were different from the West. And it was a place of Afro-Asian solidarity against Western imperialism. So here you have a picture of Bandung. And so the key principle of the new Bandung spirits were basically codified with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, that is mutual respect of state sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. And these principles have become the defining principles of China foreign policy. And I wrote a book about sovereignty in China, and if you're interested, you're more than welcome to look at it or ask questions later in the Q&A. But so this was like kind of different norms from Western imperialism. And here we have one manifesto, right, done with imperialism. China in the 1960s became an example of Chinese revolution and an example of universal significance against imperialism and colonialism, that share struggle of oppressed people against Western imperialism, and examples of South-South cooperation, of the solidarity between China and the developing world, a united front against, again, Western nations, and ultimately of peaceful coexistence. And one example of Chinese engagement in Africa that reflect in a way this South-South cooperation was the construction of the Tanzania Railroad. So the Tanzania Railroad is a railroad in East Africa that connects the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania with the town of Kapiri Mposhi in Zambia, Central Province. And this is a single track railroad that is long 1,860 kilometers and was mostly built and financed by Chinese and completed in 1976. And it is considered a statement of China-Africa friendship. And it also served the purpose of revolution, as we can see here in the manifesto, right? Serve the revolutionary people of the world. And you see this Chinese constructor in Africa building the railroads. At the same time, we can see how economy started also to play a more important role than ideology. And for instance, President Nyerere, one of the initiators of Tazara, declared that in the past, construction of railroads by foreigners in Africa was for the purpose of plundering Africa's wealth. But then he said that Chinese did it for a totally different purpose. They built the Tanzania Railroad to help grow our national economy. So even here we start seeing like this economical aspect that replaced more ideological, right? The idea of development, economic development. There are issues, however, with the framing the relationship as South-South Corporation. So of course there are positive aspects of Chinese engagement, and so there's like development opportunities that China brought that could not be there. Also today with the Belt and Road Initiative that China is promoting, China is keep building railroads and infrastructures in Africa as a leader in that, a project that no other Western country will take. So I think it definitely offers opportunity and promote economic development. However, with the South-South Cooperation, there tends to be an uncritical emphasis on the modernization and development. There is this erotization, if you want, of engineers, and also this shared feeling of being culturally and economically backward. And so there is this need to catch up with the West, to modernize, still today. And then the problem is whether China still belongs to the South, right? China now is a global power. Is it really belonging to this global South, this developing world? And also another problem is that there is this asymmetry that is actually exacerbated partly. And there is this paternalistic approach sometimes of China toward the rest of the global South. So it's not really peer-to-peer. And China, of course, is much more powerful than other African nations. So you wonder whether there is really this win-win cooperation. And also studies from the United Nations Center Conference on Trade and Investment show that Chinese trade and investment reproduce African countries as exporters of raw materials and importers of manufactured goods from China. So this it's different from this equal win-win cooperation. And of course, like if you export raw material and import manufactured good, that's not very good for your economy, right? You make much more if you actually export like manufactured goods, right? And so this is one of the characterizations. Let's move now to China as a neocolonial power. And so critics argue that that China has become a neocolonial power. China involvement in Africa echoes the first rise of foreign interest in Africa during the 18th and 19th centuries, when European colonies carved up the continent and seized African land. And neocolonialism can be interpreted as a diminution of Africa's state sovereignty through an asymmetric economic relations and inequitable trade and investments between the parties. China used trade to co-opt African elites and government into abiding and advancing Chinese mercantilist interest and for the protection of Chinese business at the expenses of African people, social and environmental concerns. And the combination of trade, financial investments, and aid helped facilitate export, again, of raw material to China that resemble extractive activities of the colonial systems and old powers. Another way to characterize is like this new scramble for Africa, where there is this external geopolitics of power that doesn't really take into account Africa. Just decide the future of Africa and scramble, divide Africa as again old powers did. However, there are limitations of this characterization of the relationship between China and Africa, and China as a neocolonial power. And of course, China economic pragmatism dogma, coupled with the lower concern for welfare of African population and human rights abuses, and its closeness to political elites, do raise some legitimate concern and questions upon the neocolonialist nature of Sino-Africa relations. However, there are scholars that started to emphasize more like African states agency. What about the agency of the state? They actually are able to shape their relationship in the way they want. So Africans are not passive recipient of what China is trying to do, but actually shapes it. And actually there is the scholar that talks about two ways exploitation. and show how, for instance, Angola, in the Angolan case, the Angola government made use of sovereignty over natural resources extraction, such as oil, for export, and use the proceeds toward reinforcing their legitimacy, their political legitimacy. And also this investment, if you want, benefited African states and give opportunities of investment that would not be there otherwise. And also China goals are different. They're not just extractive. And so, for instance, some scholars have pointed at China debt relief activities where China gave over 10 billion RMB of loans to African states and invested also in non-resource rich states such as Guinea-Bissau. But this again can be thought as a political move. Then let's move to China and the debt trap diplomacy. So this is also another way to characterize it, to characterize the relationship. And so the idea is that China is trapping recipient country with loans that they cannot pay back. And when this country cannot pay back, China just start to take assets. And one key example that has been used is the Hambantota, as a port in Sri Lanka, where there was this 99-year lease of Hambantota, and it was considered to be the result of Sri Lanka not being able to pay back its debt to China. Another case in Africa was Mombasa port in Kenya. China built a railroad from Nairobi to Mombasa, and actually I did field work there. I wrote an article about adaptive governance related to this railroad project. But then there was the idea that because Kenya was not able to pay back, there was this kind of term in the loan that the port of Mombasa would have been taken as an asset if Kenya was not able to pay back the loan. However, further studies show that there's no evidence for this debt trap diplomacy. Very often is the host country that starts negotiation, is not China that actively tries to put, to plot this debt trap. And in the case, for instance, of Hambantota, there is no debt for equity agreement at all. And these agreements are very complex, they're like thousands of pages. And, sometimes journalists just take one piece of an extract that doesn't even exist. So it's very tricky. And then another aspect is that, there is this debt trap, but then very often the debt that this countries owe to China is much less than what we imagine, and is actually often owe much more to Western financial markets, Western countries rather than and private is privately owned rather than China. Then another way to talk about China-Africa relations is the idea that China is spreading a model that is trying to export, and this model can be economic, or China can try to export authoritarianism. And this kind of China model would be opposed to the Washington Consensus, that is a set of 10 economic policy prescriptions for free market economic policies. And this constituted the standard reform package for the developing world, promoted officially by Washington, D.C., by Western powers. That was very intrusive of country sovereignty, because this would have implied like a transformation of the regulations of all the system, like forced privatization and liberalization. But what is the content of the China model is very much debated. For some, it is China exporting industrial parks and special economic zones. For other, again, is authoritarianism. China is trying to promote its own political view. However, China has not yet formulated an official standard or model of development to export to other countries. Xi Jinping has talked about an option, though, and Xi Jinping thought is becoming really important as an ideology, almost like Mao thought. So, we only have Mao thought and Xi Jinping thought. No other leader has books that contains their thoughts. So that's quite remarkable. And also, Chinese Communist Party International Liaison Department recently sent official delegations to various countries, African countries, to promote Xi Jinping thought and China's successful experience of governance. And although there is no official China model that the central government is actively promoting, China Rise has contributed to the spread of ideas, institutions, and policies to other countries. And here we can see how one African leader talked about the Chinese example very positively. So what binds us together is that China is an example. China has been able to pull billions of people out of poverty, has created an industrial and progressive society, and so forth. So it's seen really as an example. However, there are again limitations for this China model. First of all, because there isn't yet an official policy or an officially defined model to export. And even the BRI, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative, it's very ambivalent. Like, we don't even have a list of projects for the BRI. So there is like this very kind of broad definition that can be interpreted in many different ways. Then another limit to the China model is sovereignty first. That China respect other countries' sovereignty, so it will not impose conditionalities or strings to the loans. And then there is a great work by Tan Xiaoyang that talked about pragmatism and adaptability. So China does not have a model. It's just very pragmatic. And as I also wrote in another paper, it adapts to local conditions. So let's last slide bit looks into the future, a new type of international relations. Xi Jinping recently at the FOCAC, the last FOCAC meeting, virtual meeting, talked about China-Africa relations as a shining example for building a new type of international relations. And this has been further confirmed in a new white paper that defines China-Africa relations as an exemplary model for world development and cooperation that will create a new type of international relations and building a global community of shared future. And so what does this mean? It means that we're heading more toward a Sinocentric world. Are we going to be Sinicized? So this is to be defined, right? But even in China, there is Xi Jinping talks about this new type of international relations, bringing as an example China-Africa relations, where China, of course, especially in the FOCAC, is China and all the other African countries. It's very Sinocentric, right? China is at the center. And so I want to conclude with this slide. And one of the key issues in the way China-Africa relations have been characterized is that we often fall in old categories, such as neocolonialism, scramble for concessions, models, debt trap. And I believe that one of the main issues that in the West, we still struggle to understand and make sense of China, not to mention China and Africa relations. And the fact is that China and Africa alone are very complex, and there is no essence to them or their relationship. Just recently, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the US, assessed China as a partner, as a competitor, and as a systematic rival. In Africa, China's role has been seen as a development partner, as economic competitor, or as a colonizer. And this shows how complex the relationship is, that cannot be constrained within any of the categories or characterization that I discussed before. And probably China-Africa relations fall a bit into all of this categorization and none at the same time. So it's complex. There's not just one single category. And I want to conclude with this quotation from Richard Wright, who was an African-American author. He said that when the day comes that Asian and African raw material are processed in Asia and in Africa by labor whose needs are not as inflated as those of Western laborers, the supremacy of Western world, economic, cultural, and political will have been broken once and for all on this earth, and the occidentalization of mankind will have definitely set in. And this was the time of utopia and dream, and in part it has materialized because we see how Africa now has become the center for production sometimes. But what I'm interested in is this idea of the occidentalization, de-Westernization. Is it even possible? Is it a dream or a nightmare? And what does it mean also for Africa-China relations? And for sure, China-Africa together can define much of it in the future of this de-Westernization. But then the question is whether de-Occidentalization will mean Sinization, or like a Sinocentric world order. And here I conclude, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Karai. That was such an amazing taste of NYU's academics, really giving us a sense of what it's like to be in the classroom. And so like you said, let's take some questions. I see them popping in the chat right now. So we first have a question from Eloise. Eloise would like to know, was the spreading of the non-aligned movement into Africa facilitated by the Chinese? And her follow-up is, could it be argued that long-term loans and aids are actually stunting African countries' economic development?
Yeah, thank you, Eloise. These are great questions. And in terms of non-aligned movement, that was not the original idea of China, but I think it was from the Indonesia president, if I'm not wrong. But of course, China was in a different situation because it was still Cold War, and it was very much aligned with the Soviet Union until the Sino-Soviet split. So it wanted to be out of, but I think China was probably more aligned than any other country, but it supported the non-aligned movement. And then the second question, could it be argued that long-term loans and aid are actually stunting African countries? I think so. I think that all these loans, I mean, some of them are necessary, right? Because they bring finance that is, if it's well invested, can produce development. But I think that also in the Western world, like all the development that has been, all this aid that has been given to Africa has not produced the results that were hoped for. And actually, probably, as you said, stunted African countries' economic development more, like, the limit the economic development of African countries. But one element of China in Africa is that it doesn't give that much aid. It's more investments, loans that have to be repaid. So the actual aid is has to be differentiated, and is much less than maybe Western powers. And more, again, is this kind of investments, right? Loans that have to be repaid. And I remember when I interviewed Exim Bank. Exim Bank is one of the leader China policy banks that gives a lot of money as part of the Belt and Road Initiative projects. And when I was talking to this bankers in Africa, in Ethiopia, they were saying, yeah, we need to profit, to make money out of this project. So there has to be a return. They cannot put a country into that trap, because that would be very bad for the reputation of China, especially now that everybody's watching China. So this project had to be economically feasible, and they have to make profit. So, it's not just giving aid, but like, we invest in you, we built a railroad, and then from this railroad, we need to get money back, so that the country is able to pay back this loan to the Chinese bank. Yeah, I hope I answer.
Such great questions, such great questions.
Yeah.
And I feel like a great follow-up from another one of our attendees that kind of lends itself to that and the influence of China. Are there concerns on whether communism will spread throughout Africa as they're kind of, making stake and claiming certain parts of the region?
So, the problem, like, is China today communist country, right? So it's a capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Now we have Xi Jinping thoughts that is a kind of evolution from communism. There are some communist elements, but I wouldn't characterize China today as a communist. That said, back in time, there were much concern about China spreading proletarian revolution. And China helped with its little finances spreading, like, not revolution, but helping overthrow some governments also in Africa. And so there was a lot of concern about, China spreading communism in the 60s. And that's why also there was a transformation from a more ideological kind of promotion of China abroad to a more pragmatic. So now it's more about economic development than spreading ideology. But then, as I said, now with Xi Jinping thought that there are these liaisons that have been sent to African countries to, train people into African thought, that might be different. But I don't think African leaders are really concerned about communism or even Xi Jinping thought. What does it mean exactly? There's a lot of abstract things that are, or community of shared destiny is one of the example. What does it mean, right? It's powerful, but what does it mean, community of shared destiny? Yeah.
Right. Such a different version of China as we kind of think about it today and in the future than we did maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So to continue kind of in that same vein, one of our attendees, Bima, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has a question. So if China intentions are truly pure, and do you think that other countries like America, which is more diverse and liberal, are more prepared to give representation to the African people, giving proper equity in the decisions being made in their countries? For China is only a one-party system and has a much more centralized government.
Like America, which more diverse and are more prepared to give representation. So yeah, in theory, yes, I think so. In a way, and the way the international system works today, right, is in theory democratic. One country, one vote in the United Nations. Besides certain parts of it where you have just few countries that have veto power. But it has been a very democratic system, and probably is also because of the American hegemony, Western hegemony in the past decades. But that said, China can still pay attention to African leaders. Of course, is maybe a bit less sensitive to civil society, right? It's something that is not used to in China, right? I mean, it's used to, but the way of accountability is different, right? You don't have a vote, you don't have real elections, but there is concern for the local people, also from Chinese perspective, and you can see that with the idea of corporate social responsibility and how this Chinese company, state-owned enterprises, changed their behaviors in African countries to really respond to civil society, the criticism. I think they can, and there is more attention paid to the locals, and similar to the US. It's different because again they don't have the democracy within China, so it's a different kind of attention. But there is definitely attention to host country, local people, and there are all these efforts on corporate social responsibility that have been advertised even with Facebook, Twitter. So they use all these platforms that are banned in China.
Right. Yeah, no, I think the focus on corporate social responsibility is such an important way to think about it, and that's something that is very Americanized that we think about here in terms of giving back. But to think about that, other countries and other places are using that as a tool to ensure that there is a reciprocity in their relationship, I think is really important. Yeah. So let's switch gears just a little bit. We have a question from Gina, who wants to know how the use of cryptocurrency could affect these relations.
I am not an expert, Gina, I'm sorry. My husband is totally into crypto. I am not, but China, I think it has this mixed, this ambivalent relationship with crypto, right? So I think at a certain point they supported it, and then there is always this state sovereign control over crypto, but they're very advanced, very technological. So I wouldn't be surprised if 10 years they use crypto, but it's a state crypto, it's a sovereign crypto, it's not a private crypto. Yeah.
I think that was a pretty good answer for not being an expert, but Gina, if you do some research, let us know what you find out. We'd love to hear that. So I'm going to rephrase. Yeah, please go ahead.
Related to Gina is how technology, Africa made a leap in terms of technology also because of China. We have this digital Silk Road. China is building up all the 5G, I don't think that they're quite there yet at the 5G, but all the internet kind of infrastructure for Africa, and also chip phones. So they made they provide the infrastructure for the crypto, that's for sure.
Which is huge and a huge part of being able to utilize that resource at all. So definitely a little bit of an influence there, right? Okay, I'm going to rephrase this next question just a little bit because I think I understand what this attendee is getting at. So as an NYU professor, you definitely have experience interacting with people of different cultures and different languages, not to mention all your previous experience before coming here. But do you find that some of these cultural differences and misconceptions could kind of be leading to some of that misinformation that you were referencing very early on in your presentation? We were kind of setting the groundwork of these the misunderstanding of how these relationships are being formalized. Do you think that has those cultural differences play a role there?
I mean, I think sometimes cultural differences are inflated, and there is this, as I said, also at a certain point, there is this tendency of essentializing China or Africa. What is Chinese culture? What is African culture even more, right? African culture is like, maybe tradition, but like, it can be anything. And sometimes like African has more in common with, foreigners than with other Africans. So culture, I think, is tricky to use. Of course, like we all belong to certain cultures. However, we decide to define them. So we have our own value system, our way of seeing the world. And so we use certain categories to make sense of the world. And hence, like, for instance, we use like neocolonialism, like, because we're familiar with that, comes from our kind of history. But then I think there is a risk of essentializing even the China or Africa, or the relationship of between China and Africa. And again, it's complex, and probably we need we used to use a broad prism through which to look at like China-Africa relations. Try not to use culture that much. I wouldn't really fall into culture. It's very murky kind of terrain, very slippery soil.
Yeah, there's so much nuance there that you could make the case for tons of commonalities versus tons of differences.
Yeah,
so
I'm very skeptical. I think whenever you hear about like cultural like relation, even Xi Jinping now talking about like the new the example of new international relations, whenever there is a use of history or culture, I would be a bit skeptical, like always be a bit skeptical. Yeah.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think we have another question that leads a little bit into this kind of, if we're talking about culture, what's happening historically. So a question from Olive. If Ethiopia is for a while ago was considered one of the most attractive in Africa as a private investment, but now given the state of civil war and resulting economic collapse, does that make them less of a does that deter private investment and effectively then promote China's cause here?
So that's also a great question. Thank you, Olive, for asking. And so China, of course, like, because it goes investing with a lot of like state-owned enterprises, state money, like it brings this package that other private cannot afford, right? I also wrote something about America, whether America can compete with China in infrastructure investments in Africa with China. And it's very difficult because they will not be there to start with, right? The private investor building infrastructure is very kind of long-term game, not much gain. So they will not be there already. So the civil war, just as you said, deter even more private investors. That said, China is already invested in Ethiopia, has invested a lot. So it's in its interest to make sure that these projects are profitable, as I said before, right? They need to have some returns. Like they never forgave, they really forgive debt in China. They can renegotiate, but then at the end you have to pay them back. So, but then I don't know how much it really promotes the Chinese cause, Ethiopia being in such a bad state. It actually promote maybe corruption, like even more, so that China get in touch with the leader and or authoritarian regime, and so it might actually harm as well the Chinese cause, the civil war, not just because the money that China invested will not return to China, but also because probably there will be more corruption, like more relation between authoritarian regime that will be poorly perceived by other African democracies and other like Western democracies, but also within the state by people that oppose the regime, right? Civil society that oppose the authoritarian rule, that will be again poorly perceived.
I think that's really, really important, and again, speaks to the nuance of these relationships and how many levels there are that go into this expansion effort. So we're coming close to time. I just have one or two more questions that I would love to hear from you. And this is a little bit more generalized. Excuse me. How do you feel that this pandemic has influenced their expansion and their kind of global reach, especially within their African partners?
Yeah. So actually, the pandemic did have positive effects in a way for China image, because China was perceived also by African countries as a country that did very well in managing the pandemic, much better than democracies, at least at first. And then China also gave vaccines to African countries before it even vaccinated its own people. So there were these efforts right away to send masks, send medical equipment. And, even if the West did, the West was not so vociferous as China. So China made sure that whatever was sent to African countries, so like, any aid, good things, was very well advertised. And so I think that there was a perception of that. And I think the Afrobarometer, the view of China, I think, improved over in this past in this past years, and also China joined other countries with a debt moratorium, with a suspension of the debt. So I think that was also positively seen vis-a-vis like Western countries that were perceived not doing enough for African countries. So it's I guess it was better perceived, and like some of this BRI project continued, were not stalled, were partly stalled, but like now they went back full speed. So I guess it is a positive impact, if you want, after the pandemic.
Yeah, and that is so interesting. And I think something that, as an American myself and somebody who spends most of my time with other Americans, that's not our perspective of how things have gone here. And so I think to hear that there has been a positive influence and that there is this positive outcome that came from these relationships is really such an interesting dynamic than how we think about it here.
Yeah, but also, I mean, Africa is big, and then of course you have different stakeholders, and like some people are still very critical about China. So whatever it does is seen with suspicion. So, it's mixed feelings. And I encourage students to see Afrobarometer, which is like a great resource to see public opinion in Africa. And so there's also survey about like opinions about China, so you can see how it's evolved and how it was transformed in the past years, also after the pandemic. Yeah,
I love that. I hope everybody out there is writing that down so they all can go research as soon as we're finished. So just one question. I know we didn't get to everybody, and I'll give you some contact information about where you can reach us in just a moment. But to kind of wrap it up for all of our attendees out there, what are some things or some topics within this umbrella that you feel like really need to be researched in this new class of young folks that are coming up and trying to decide what's their passion? What are some things that you would suggest that they start to look into or start to get excited about?
Yeah, so I think China-Africa relations is a huge kind of field potentially that has not yet received enough attention. And so you can do research on the history of China-Africa relations, or like rethink also some of the categories that we use, like even development. What does it mean, economic development, modernization, neocolonialism? So there's huge kind of feel like, it's a land to conquer if you are a young scholar coming in, or like a young student. So there's so much research that can be done, like about the present, about the future, the past, And so I personally have done some work on international law, history of international law in China, sovereignty, but even looking at Africa, like, idea of sovereignty, right? Because it was a scramble for concession, like that divided Africa into lots of land for kind of colonial powers. But even colonialism, I think that this needs new perspectives, new way of looking even at the history of colonialism and imperialism. And it's very relevant for the future, because again, we are at a time where China is a global power, and it's different on so many levels from the US, from what we were used to, from Western liberal hegemony. So what is going to become? And if this, as Xi Jinping says, is really Africa-China relations example of a new international relations, how this is going to be characterized, right? And how it's going to define other international relations. So it's plenty of areas and aspects that can be further studied by students coming in, and it's very exciting, very exciting. There's so many misconceptions, like about Africa and China. Yeah.
So I hope everybody out there heard that. There's tons of space in this field for people to come and participate and do their research and provide their perspectives. But I just want to again say a huge thank you to Professor Karai for a wonderful session. Thank you so much to our audience for being here. Before we wrap up, we just want to share a couple of ways that you can stay connected with us throughout the coming weeks and months. If you do have more questions about this session in particular, about learning more about global China studies, please feel free to check out Professor Karai's profile on the NYU Shanghai website. If you have questions about admissions or your application, you can reach out to us at admissions@nyu.edu. And if you're interested specifically in NYU Abu Dhabi, you can reach out to us at nyuad.admissions@nyu.edu. And if you're interested specifically in NYU Shanghai, Professor Karai's home campus, please reach out to us at shanghai.admissions@nyu.edu. And we hope you check out other virtual offerings that we have throughout the spring and fall. I'm going to drop a link in the chat now for you so you can visit our website at your convenience. And we hope that you can come and visit us at campus soon. With that, we thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to NYU shortly. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.